Samantha Wells worked hard every day. She flipped burgers on a sizzling hot grill. The sound of the spatula scraping against it became the soundtrack to her life. Grease splashed onto her apron as she made another burger. She had been doing this for hours, and her mind felt tired, but her hands kept working without thinking. "Extra pickles!" a man shouted, not even looking at her. Samantha didn't say anything. She added the pickles, wrapped the burger, and handed it over. The man took it, paid $5, and walked away without a thank you. She didn't expect a thank you anymore. Her food cart sat on a busy corner in the city where people rushed by. Samantha's small cart cost her almost everything she earned to keep. Tall buildings surrounded her, full of important people in nice clothes who made more money in an hour than she made in a whole week. Sometimes Samantha wondered what it would be like to work in one of those buildings instead of standing here serving food to people who didn't even look at her. "Mum, I'm hungry," came a small voice. Samantha turned to see her daughter Lily sitting on a small stool behind the cart. Lily's legs swung back and forth, not quite reaching the ground. Her school uniform was wrinkled, and her backpack was still on her shoulders. Samantha felt guilty. She had forgotten to pack Lily a snack again. "I know, sweetheart. Just wait a little longer, okay? Then I'll get you something to eat." Lily nodded and went back to her coloring book. She was used to waiting. She had been waiting for a long time, waiting for her dad to come back, waiting for things to get better, waiting for her mom to have time for more than just working and being tired. The sun was hot, and it made the small space around the cart feel like an oven. Sweat trickled down Samantha's back, soaking her shirt. Her feet ached in her old sneakers, the ones with soles that were coming off. She had meant to buy new shoes months ago, but every time she had a little extra money, something else came up. Last week, it was for Lily's school supplies. The week before that, it was the electricity bill. There was always something. A woman with fancy sunglasses walked up to the cart. Her heels clicked as she walked confidently towards Samantha. She ordered a salad with extra dressing and paid with a shiny credit card. Samantha noticed the woman's perfect nails, expensive watch, and how her clothes fit perfectly. Samantha couldn't help but wonder what decisions had led this woman to success while she was stuck behind a food cart, smelling of onions. "Keep the change," the woman said, even though there wasn't any change to keep. By 2:30 p.m. the lunch rush slowed down, and Samantha finally felt a little relief. She grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler under the counter and took a sip, though it was warm and didn't really help. Lily had fallen asleep on her stool, her coloring book slipping from her lap. Samantha carefully caught it before it hit the floor. This was Samantha's life. She had been living this way for the last 7 years, ever since David, Lily's father, left. He had promised to stay forever, but he walked out when Lily was just a baby. Samantha had been 23 then, full of dreams about opening her own restaurant. Now, at 30, those dreams felt far away. She couldn't afford culinary school or rent a restaurant. So she bought the food cart second-hand, learned to make simple meals for people who didn't have time to sit down. Every day was about making enough money to pay rent, buy groceries, and keep Lily in school. There was never any money left for dreams. One day, a black Mercedes pulled up. The car was quiet, but it sounded like power. Samantha barely noticed it. Rich people drove by all the time, usually on their way to somewhere important. But then the door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a nice suit. Samantha noticed his grey hair and the way he moved with confidence, like he knew he belonged everywhere he went. Samantha straightened up, suddenly aware of the grease on her apron and her messy hair. The man walked up to her cart and looked at the menu she had made from an old piece of wood. Behind him, 2 more luxury cars parked, but no one got out. It was strange, like something out of a movie. "What do you recommend?" he asked, his voice smooth and friendly. Samantha was a little surprised. People didn't usually ask her what she thought. They just ordered and moved on. The Philly cheesesteak is popular, she said, and the chicken wrap is pretty good. I'll take both, he said, pulling out a wallet and handing her a few bills without counting them. And whatever the young lady behind you might like. Samantha looked back at Lily, who was still asleep. She's fine, thank you, Samantha said. I insist, he smiled. Please. Something about the way he said it made Samantha nod. She began to prepare the food, but her mind raced. Who was this man? The griddle sizzled as Samantha laid down thin slices of steak, the familiar routine helping to steady her nerves. She could feel the man watching her work, not in a creepy way, but with genuine interest, as if the process of making a simple cheesesteak fascinated him. Samantha felt her pulse quicken, her mind spinning as she worked, trying to ignore the unfamiliar sensation of being seen, of being noticed. How long have you been running this cart? He asked, leaning slightly against the counter, his voice warm and curious. 7 years, Samantha replied, flipping the steak with practiced ease. She added peppers and onions, her hands steady despite the sudden wave of emotion rising in her chest. Started when my daughter was a baby. That's impressive. Single-handedly, he said with a casual smile. What's your name? Samantha. Samantha Wells. She added cheese to the steak, watching it melt into the sizzling meat and vegetables, the comforting smell rising in the air. She could feel her cheeks flush, but she didn't know why. Why did he care? Why did it matter to her that he seemed so interested in her? Edward Monroe. He extended his hand across the counter, his grip firm and confident. After a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His hand was warm, and his gaze was steady. There was something about him that made her feel seen. Truly seen. It's a pleasure to meet you, Samantha, he said. The words hung in the air, filling the space between them with an odd warmth. Samantha finished preparing the cheesesteak, wrapped it carefully, and handed it to him, along with the chicken wrap. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the money he offered. It was $100 bill, for food that cost $12. Her heart skipped a beat. This had to be a mistake. People didn't pay that much for a quick lunch. Not here, not at her cart. I don't have change for this, she said, trying to hand it back. I'm not looking for change. Edward took the wrapped sandwiches but pushed the bill back toward her. Consider it an investment. In what? She asked, unable to mask the confusion in her voice. In good food and honest work, he said with a smile. The smile wasn't the kind of smile that made her feel small. It was the kind that made her chest tighten in a way she didn't understand. I'll be back tomorrow, Samantha Wells. Same time. He turned and walked back to his car. Within moments, all 3 luxury vehicles pulled away from the curb, their engines humming quietly as they disappeared into the busy flow of city traffic. Samantha stood frozen, staring at the $100 bill in her hand. It felt heavy, like it was more than just money. It felt like a promise. Or maybe a test. Lily stirred behind her, rubbing her eyes sleepily. Who was that man, Mum? I don't know, baby. Samantha folded the bill carefully, tucking it into her pocket. Her mind raced. I really don't know. That night, after she had closed up the cart and taken Lily home to their tiny apartment, Samantha couldn't stop thinking about Edward Monroe. She lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. The encounter replayed over and over in her mind. Men like him didn't just show up at food carts and hand out $100 bills. There had to be a reason, an angle she wasn't seeing. Was this some kind of charity? Or did he want something in return that she didn't understand? But what could she possibly have that a man who drove a Mercedes would want? The next day she arrived at her corner spot earlier than usual. Her stomach was tight and she tried to convince herself that she was being ridiculous, that it was just a one-time thing, that he wouldn't show up again. People like him didn't go to places like hers, but a small voice in her head whispered that maybe, just maybe, he would. The morning rush came and went, and by lunchtime her anxiety was growing. She glanced at every car that passed by, her eyes searching for the distinctive black Mercedes. She could feel her pulse quicken each time a car slowed, but it wasn't him. Not yet. Lily sat on her stool, working on her homework, oblivious to her mother's distraction. At exactly 1:30, the same time as the previous day, the Mercedes pulled up to the curb again. Edward stepped out, alone this time. The other two cars were nowhere in sight. He wore a charcoal grey suit with a burgundy tie, his appearance just as polished as it had been the day before. As he approached the cart, Samantha felt her heart race again, the beat quickening in a way that made her throat dry. "Good afternoon, Samantha." He smiled like they were old friends, like they'd known each other for years. "I've been thinking about that cheesesteak all morning." "Same order?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Actually," he said, leaning slightly forward, his eyes never leaving hers, "I'd like to try something different. What would you make for yourself if money wasn't an object?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her anything like that in years. Samantha paused, letting the question sink in. She thought about it, really thought about it, letting herself remember the dreams she'd once had before reality had beaten them down, before she had settled for this, just trying to survive. "There's this pasta dish I used to make," she said slowly, her voice soft as she spoke the words she hadn't said in a long time. "Before I had the cart. Pappardelle with short rib ragout. It takes hours to make properly, letting the meat braise until it falls apart. Fresh herbs, good wine in the sauce. It's not food cart food." "Why not?" Edward asked, genuinely curious. "Because I can't charge enough to make it worth the time and ingredients," Samantha said with a sigh. "People come here for quick, cheap lunch. They don't come for slow-cooked short ribs." Edward was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying her face with that same intense interest from the previous day. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel like he saw her, not just as a food cart vendor, but as something more. What if they did? What if you had a place where you could make food like that? Would you? Samantha laughed, but it was bitter, laced with hopelessness. "That's a nice fantasy," she said, "but fantasies don't pay rent." What if it wasn't a fantasy? Edward leaned forward, his voice dropping to something more serious. "What if I told you I could help you make that happen?" "Why would you do that?" Samantha felt her defenses rise. "You don't know me. I'm just someone who makes sandwiches on a street corner." "You're someone who's been running a successful business for 7 years while raising a daughter alone," Edward said, his tone calm but firm. "Do you have any idea how rare that kind of determination is?" He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I build things, Samantha. Real estate, businesses, opportunities. And I'm very good at seeing potential where others see nothing. I see potential in you." Samantha's hands gripped the edge of the cart. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to grab onto this impossible offer with both hands. But the other part, the part that had learned through hard experience that things that seemed too good to be true usually were, held her back. "I need to think about it." "Of course." Edward reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, the raised lettering spelling out, "Edward Monroe, CEO, Monroe Development Group." He handed it to her. "Take all the time you need." "But Samantha, I meant what I said yesterday. This is an investment. I invest in people I believe in, and I believe in you." He ordered a simple burger, paid with another large bill, and left. Samantha stood holding his business card, staring at it in disbelief. The phone number, the email address, the decision waiting to be made. Lily tugged on her sleeve, breaking her thoughts. "Is that man going to help us, Mum?" Samantha looked down at her daughter's hopeful face and felt something crack inside her chest. Was this real? Could this really be the chance she had been waiting for? "I don't know, sweetheart," Samantha whispered, tucking the business card into her apron pocket where it seemed to burn against her hip. "I really don't know." That evening, after closing the cart and getting Lily settled with leftover chicken wrap and cartoons, Samantha sat at their tiny kitchen table and pulled out the business card. Edward Monroe. The name had been nagging at her all afternoon, scratching at the edges of her memory like something she should recognize but couldn't quite place. She opened her laptop, the old machine wheezing to life, and typed his name into the search bar. The results flooded her screen. Edward Monroe, real estate mogul. Edward Monroe closes $50 million development deal. Edward Monroe's company revolutionizes downtown district. Page after page of success. Of a man who'd built an empire from the ground up. She clicked on the Images tab, and her breath caught in her throat. There, in a photo from what looked like a charity gala, stood Edward Monroe. But it wasn't the recent Edward she'd met. This was an older photo, maybe from 10 or 15 years ago, and suddenly, like a door slamming open in her mind, she recognized him. Eddie Monroe. Her hands started shaking. Edward Monroe from Jefferson High School. Edward Monroe who'd made her life hell for 4 years. Edward Monroe who'd mocked her second-hand clothes, who'd called her Welfare Sam in front of the entire cafeteria, who'd orchestrated a cruel prank at prom that had left her crying in the bathroom while everyone laughed. Edward Monroe who'd represented everything she'd hated about privilege and cruelty. That Edward Monroe was now offering to help her. Samantha's mind raced, connecting dots she didn't want to see. The expensive cars, the $100 bills, the sudden interest in her struggling food cart. This wasn't about potential or investment. This was about something else entirely, something that made her stomach turn. Was this guilt? Some kind of twisted redemption arc for his conscience? Or worse, was this another game? Another way for Edward Monroe to remind her of exactly where she stood in the world's hierarchy. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding. Lily looked up from the TV, concerned. "You okay, Mom?" "Fine, baby. Just tired." But Samantha's mind was anything but fine. It was spiraling, pulling up memories she'd buried years ago, the whispers in hallways, the laughter when she'd shown up in the same jeans 3 days in a row because they were the only pair she owned. The time Edward had asked her to prom as a joke in front of his friends, then laughed when she'd actually thought he was serious. She'd worked so hard to leave that girl behind, the one who'd been ashamed of her poverty, who'd felt less than everyone else. And now, here was Edward Monroe, successful and polished, and offering her dreams she'd thought were dead. Was he even the same person? People changed, didn't they? 15 years was a long time. But the question that really haunted her, the one that kept her awake long after Lily had gone to bed, was simpler and more terrifying. Did he recognize her? The next morning, Samantha almost didn't go to her corner. She considered calling it quits, packing up the cart and finding a different location, anywhere that Edward Monroe wouldn't find her. But she had regulars who depended on her, and more importantly, she needed every dollar she could make. Running away wasn't an option when you had a daughter to feed. She set up the cart with shaking hands, her eyes constantly scanning the street for that black Mercedes. When 1:30 approached, her anxiety spiked so high she felt physically ill. She kept telling herself he wouldn't come, that yesterday's conversation had been the end of it, that she'd never have to face him again. The Mercedes pulled up at 1:32. Edward stepped out, and this time Samantha saw him differently. She saw the boy he'd been in the set of his shoulders, in the confident way he moved. How had she not recognized him immediately? Maybe because she'd trained herself not to look too closely at successful people, not to compare their lives to hers. Maybe because 15 years and expensive suits had transformed him into someone who seemed completely different from the cruel teenager she'd known. Samantha. He approached the cart with that same warm smile. "I was hoping you'd thought about my offer. I know who you are." The words came out before she could stop them, sharp and accusatory. Edward stopped, his smile faltering. For a moment something flickered across his face, surprise mixed with something else she couldn't quite read. Then his expression shifted, became more serious, more real. "Jefferson High," he said quietly. "Class of 2010. So you did recognize me?" Samantha's hands gripped the edge of the cart so hard her knuckles turned white. When? Yesterday? Before? Samantha snapped. The first time I saw your cart was 3 months ago. Edward's voice had lost its smooth confidence. He sounded, for the first time, uncertain. I was driving by and saw the name on the cart, Samantha's Kitchen. I thought it might be you, so I looked into it, found out it was you. And you've been planning this ever since? Coming here with your expensive cars and your big offers? What is this, Edward? Guilt? Some kind of apology tour for your conscience? Samantha screamed. Behind her, Lily shifted on her stool, picking up on the tension in her mother's voice. A customer approached the cart, but Edward held up a hand. Please, give us a moment. He pulled out his wallet and handed the confused customer a $20 bill. Get lunch somewhere else today. On me. The customer, bewildered, but not about to argue with free money, walked away. Edward turned back to Samantha, and for the first time she saw something raw in his eyes, something that looked almost like shame. You want the truth? Yes, it started as guilt. I've thought about you, about high school, about the things I did more times than I can count. I was a terrible person back then, Samantha. Cruel and privileged, and completely blind to how my actions affected others. What I did to you, the way I treated you, it's one of my biggest regrets. So this is your redemption. Write a check, change my life, feel better about yourself, Samantha yelled. No. Edward's voice was firm. This is me recognizing something I should have seen 15 years ago. You were smart, determined, and talented even then. You worked 2 jobs to pay for school supplies while I complained about which car my parents bought me. You had more strength in your little finger than I had in my entire body. And instead of respecting that, I made your life miserable because it made me feel powerful. Samantha felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. I've spent the last 3 months watching you, Edward continued. Not in a creepy way, I hope you understand, but observing. I've seen how hard you work, how you treat every customer with respect even when they don't deserve it, how you're teaching your daughter by example what real perseverance looks like. And yes, I want to help you, but not because of guilt, because you deserve the chance you never got, the chance I was handed, and you had to fight for every single day. If you're still watching this story, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next is going to completely change everything you think you know about Samantha's decision. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Samantha stood, frozen, torn between the girl she'd been and the woman she'd become. Part of her wanted to throw his offer back in his face, to tell him that she didn't need anything from Edward Monroe, that she'd rather struggle forever than accept help from someone who'd once made her feel worthless. But another part, the part that was tired of struggling, the part that wanted more for Lily than this endless cycle of barely making it, that part whispered that maybe people really could change. Why should I trust you? Her voice cracked despite her efforts to keep it steady. You shouldn't, Edward said simply. Not yet. Trust has to be earned, especially after what I did, so let me earn it. Let me prove that I'm not that person anymore. How? Samantha questioned. Have dinner with me. Not as a date, he added quickly, seeing her expression. As a business meeting. Bring Lily if you want. Let me show you what I'm proposing. Show you the actual plans, the numbers, everything. Complete transparency. And if after that you still want nothing to do with me, I'll respect that and never bother you again. Samantha looked back at Lily, who was watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes. Her daughter deserved so much more than this life of waiting on stoops and eating leftover food cart meals. But she also deserved a mother who made smart decisions, who didn't trust people just because they dangled shiny opportunities in front of her. One dinner, Samantha heard herself say. But I'm bringing Lily, and it's in a public place. And Edward? If this is some kind of game, if you're planning to humiliate me again, I swear I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. Something that looked like pain crossed Edward's face. I deserve that. Friday night, there's a family restaurant on Oak Street, Giuseppe's. 7 o'clock? Samantha nodded stiffly. Edward started to leave, then turned back. He walked back to his Mercedes and drove away, leaving Samantha standing behind her cart with a whirlwind of emotions she didn't know how to process. A new customer approached, and she automatically went through the motions of taking an order, but her mind was miles away. "Mum?" Lily's voice was small. "Are we going to have dinner with that man?" "Yeah, baby, we are. Is he a good person?" It was such a simple question, one that deserved a simple answer. But Samantha had learned that nothing about people was ever simple. "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out." The rest of the week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Samantha found herself constantly second-guessing her decision, playing out different scenarios in her head. What if this was all an elaborate setup for another humiliation? What if Edward's friends were going to be at the restaurant, ready to laugh at her the way they had in high school? What if the entire thing was some kind of reality show joke? But then she'd remember the look in his eyes when he apologized, the genuine shame and regret she'd seen there, and she'd wonder if maybe, just maybe, people really could change. She used some of the money Edward had given her to buy Lily a new dress for the dinner. It wasn't expensive, just something from Target, but Lily's face lit up like it was from a designer boutique. Samantha bought herself a simple black dress, the first new clothing she'd purchased in over a year. When she looked at herself in the fitting room mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked tired, older than her 30 years, but there was something else there too. Determination, strength. She'd survived this long. She could survive one dinner. Friday arrived faster than she wanted. Samantha closed the cart early, went home to shower and change, and helped Lily get ready. Her daughter was vibrating with excitement, chattering about the restaurant, about the fancy dinner they were going to have. It broke Samantha's heart a little, realizing how rare it was for them to do anything special like this. Giuseppe's was exactly the kind of place Samantha had imagined. Warm lighting, checkered tablecloths, the smell of garlic and fresh bread permeating the air. It was nice without being intimidating, family-friendly without being cheap. Edward had clearly chosen carefully. He was already there when they arrived, sitting at a corner table with what looked like a portfolio in front of him. When he saw them, he stood, and Samantha noticed he wasn't wearing a suit. Instead, he had on nice jeans and a button-down shirt, looking more approachable, more human. "Hi, Lily," he smiled at her daughter. "It's nice to meet you properly. Your mum has told me a lot about you." Lily, usually shy around strangers, seemed charmed. "She talks about you too. She says you might help us." "Lily," Samantha said sharply, embarrassed. "It's okay." Edward pulled out chairs for both of them. "I hope I can help. But first, let's have some dinner. I hear the spaghetti and meatballs here is incredible." The meal started awkwardly, with stilted conversation and long pauses. But gradually, as the food arrived and Lily began chattering about school, the tension eased slightly. Samantha found herself watching Edward carefully, looking for signs of the boy he'd been. She saw glimpses, in certain expressions or gestures, but mostly she saw someone different. Someone who listened when Lily talked about her favorite subjects, who asked genuine questions and seemed interested in the answers. After Lily had demolished a plate of spaghetti and was happily working on tiramisu, Edward finally opened his portfolio. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out architectural drawings. "This is a property I acquired 6 months ago in the downtown district. It used to be an old warehouse, completely gutted now. I've been planning to develop it into a mixed-use space, residential and commercial. These bottom 2 floors, I've been designing them as restaurant space." Samantha's breath caught as she looked at the drawings. They were beautiful, professional, showing a modern kitchen, an elegant dining room, even a small outdoor patio area. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "What does this have to do with me?" "Everything. I want you to run it. Your restaurant, Samantha. The one you dreamed about before life got in the way. You'd have complete creative control over the menu, the decor, everything. I'd handle the business side, the finances, the logistics. You'd focus on what you're good at, creating incredible food." The offer hung in the air between them, too big, too impossible to fully comprehend. Samantha's mind immediately went to all the reasons it wouldn't work, all the ways it could fail. "I can't afford rent on a space like this," Samantha said. "You wouldn't pay rent. You'd be a partner, 50-50 split on all profits after expenses." Edward responded, "I don't have any capital to invest," Samantha said. "You'd invest your talent, your work, your recipes. That's worth more than money," Edward assured her. "Edward, this is insane. I run a food cart. I've never managed a real restaurant, never dealt with that kind of operation. I'd fail. And then what? You'd lose your investment, and I'd be right back where I started, except worse, because I'd have tried and failed." Edward leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Samantha's face. "Do you know what I've learned in 15 years of business? The people who succeed aren't the ones who know everything from the start. They're the ones who are willing to learn, willing to work harder than anyone else, willing to fight for what they want. You've been doing that your whole life, Samantha. You just haven't had the resources to do it on a bigger scale. But why me? Why not hire an experienced chef, someone with credentials and training? Because credentials don't mean passion. I've worked with dozens of qualified people who treated their jobs like jobs. You treat that food cart like it's your life's work, because it is. That's what I need. That's what will make this restaurant succeed." Samantha looked down at the drawings, her mind racing. The space was beautiful, everything she'd ever dreamed of and more. She could picture it already, the kind of food she'd serve, the atmosphere she'd create. But dreams were dangerous things. They could lift you up, just to drop you harder. "There's something else," Edward said quietly, glancing at Lily, who was absorbed in her dessert. "Something I need to tell you before you make any decision." The seriousness in his tone made Samantha's stomach clench. Here it comes, she thought. The catch, the real reason behind all this. "The warehouse, the one where this restaurant would be, it's in the downtown district. Specifically, it's on 7th Street, Edward explained. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "This is too big, too much. I can't just jump into something like this." Of course." Edward closed the portfolio. "Take all the time you need. But Samantha, I want you to promise me something. Whatever you decide, decide based on what's best for you and Lily, not based on what happened 15 years ago, not based on who I was or what I did, based on what this opportunity could mean for your future." They finished dinner in relative silence, Lily oblivious to the undercurrents of tension between the adults. When they left the restaurant, Edward walked them to Samantha's beat-up Honda, parked between two much nicer cars. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said, "for giving me a chance to explain." "I haven't decided anything yet," Samantha said. "I know. But you came. That's more than I deserved." He handed her a different business card, this one with a personal cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Call me when you're ready. Or if you're never ready, that's okay too. Either way, I meant what I said. I'm sorry for who I was. I'm trying to be better." Driving home, with Lily chattering excitedly in the back seat about the tiramisu and the fancy restaurant, Samantha's mind was chaos. She'd gone into the dinner prepared to reject whatever Edward offered, prepared to maintain her distance and her dignity. But he'd done something she hadn't expected. He'd been honest, uncomfortably, almost painfully honest. And that honesty had cracked something open inside her. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Samantha pulled out her laptop again and started researching. She looked up the 7th Street development, found articles about how the neighborhood had transformed. New businesses, safe housing, community centers. She found Edward's name attached to several charitable initiatives in the area, programs for single mothers, job training, childcare assistance. Either this was the most elaborate long con she'd ever seen, or Edward Monroe really had changed, really was trying to make up for the privilege he'd abused as a teenager. But the question remained, could she trust him? Could she risk everything on the word of someone who'd once made her life miserable? She thought about Lily, about the life she wanted for her daughter. She thought about the food cart, about 7 years of barely scraping by, of watching opportunities pass her by while she stood on a street corner flipping burgers. She thought about the dreams she'd had at 23, before reality had beaten them down, before she'd learned to settle for survival instead of success. And she thought about that warehouse space, those beautiful architectural drawings, the possibility of creating something real, something lasting, something that could change not just her life, but Lily's future. The business card sat on the table in front of her. Edward's personal number, a temptation and a threat all at once. Samantha picked up her phone 3 times before finally, on the 4th attempt, dialing the number. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Samantha?" "I have conditions," she said without preamble. "If I'm going to do this, we do it my way. Complete transparency on all finances. I want to see every number, every contract, every decision. I want legal documentation of our partnership, drawn up by a lawyer I choose, not yours. And I want an exit clause. If this doesn't work, if I decide I can't do this, I can walk away without penalty." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "Agreed, all of it. Anything else?" "Yeah. One more thing," she continued. "You don't get to treat this like charity. You don't get to swoop in and save me. We're partners, equals, or we're nothing. You respect my opinions, my decisions, my expertise, even when you disagree, especially when you disagree. Samantha, I wouldn't want it any other way. You won't regret this, I promise." "I better not," Samantha said, but there was the smallest hint of hope in her voice, the first real hope she'd felt in years. "Because if you screw me over, Edward Monroe, I will make it my life's mission to destroy you." He laughed, but it sounded relieved. "I'd expect nothing less." The next morning, Samantha woke up with a knot of anxiety in her stomach that hadn't been there the day before. She'd agreed to the partnership, had actually said yes to Edward's proposal, and now, in the cold light of day, the magnitude of what she'd committed to was overwhelming. She made breakfast for Lily on autopilot, her mind already racing through everything that could go wrong. What if she failed? What if customers didn't come? What if her cooking wasn't good enough for a real restaurant? What if Edward's partners or investors saw her as a charity case, as welfare Sam, all grown up, but still not good enough for their world? "Mom, you're burning the eggs," Lily pointed out. Samantha jerked back to reality, quickly removing the pan from the heat. The eggs were indeed burned, blackened at the edges, in a way she never would have allowed at her cart. "Get it together," she told herself. "You can't fall apart now." Her phone buzzed, with a text from Edward. "Meeting with architects this afternoon at 3 p.m. Can you make it? Want your input on kitchen design." She stared at the message. This was real. This was actually happening. She texted back a quick yes, then immediately started panicking about what to wear. Did architects expect professional attire? Would she look ridiculous trying to dress like she belonged in their world? At the cart that morning, Samantha couldn't focus. She messed up orders, overcooking some items and undercooking others. Her regulars noticed something was off, but most were too polite to comment. Around noon, Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who bought soup from her every single day, finally said something. "You seem distracted today, dear. Everything all right?" Samantha hesitated, then found herself pouring out the whole story. Mrs. Chen listened patiently, her weathered face showing no judgment, only interest. "Sounds like a big opportunity," Mrs. Chen said when Samantha finished. "Scary, but big. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm not good enough for something like this?" Mrs. Chen fixed her with a sharp look. "I've been eating your food for 3 years. You think I don't know quality when I taste it? You're better than good enough, Samantha. Your problem isn't skill. It's belief. You don't believe you deserve good things." The observation hit Samantha like a physical blow because it was true. Somewhere deep down, she'd internalized the message that people like her didn't get breaks, didn't get opportunities, didn't deserve success. The food cart was safe because it matched her expectations of herself. A real restaurant, a partnership with someone like Edward Monroe that didn't fit the story she'd been telling herself about who she was and what she deserved. "How do I change that?" Samantha asked quietly. "You don't change it overnight. You just keep moving forward, keep proving to yourself that you can do it. One day at a time. Mrs. Chen smiled. Now, are you going to give me my soup, or do I have to make it myself? At 3 o'clock, Samantha found herself in a gleaming conference room in Edward's office building, surrounded by people in expensive suits carrying tablets and architectural plans. She'd changed out of her food cart clothes into the black dress she'd worn to dinner, feeling simultaneously overdressed and underdressed. Edward greeted her warmly, introducing her to the team as his partner, not his charity case or his project. The distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. Samantha, this is James Chen, lead architect, and his team. They've been working on the warehouse conversion, but I wanted you to have final say on the kitchen design since you'll be the one using it. James spread out detailed plans across the conference table, and Samantha felt her breath catch. The kitchen was enormous, professional grade, with equipment she'd only dreamed about. Industrial stoves, a walk-in refrigerator, prep stations with marble counters. It was overwhelming and perfect and terrifying all at once. What do you think? Edward asked, watching her carefully. It's incredible, but… Samantha hesitated, not wanting to seem ungrateful or difficult. Can I suggest some changes? That's why you're here. For the next 2 hours, Samantha discussed kitchen workflow with James and his team. She pointed out where counters could be repositioned for better efficiency, suggested different equipment based on what she'd actually need versus what looked impressive, redesigned the prep area to make better use of the space. To her surprise, the architects listened, took notes, actually valued her input. James even complimented her understanding of kitchen logistics. By the time the meeting ended, the plans had been significantly modified, and Samantha felt something she hadn't felt in years. Competent. Valued. Like maybe she really did know what she was doing. That was impressive, Edward said as they walked out of the conference room. You ran that meeting better than half my executives run theirs. I just know kitchens, Samantha said, uncomfortable with the praise. You know more than that. You know workflow, efficiency, practical application. That's business sense, Samantha. You've been running a business for 7 years. You just haven't been calling it that. They took the elevator down together, and in the enclosed space, Samantha finally asked the question that had been bothering her. Why are you really doing this, Edward? And don't give me the guilt answer or the redemption answer. What's the real reason? Edward was quiet for a moment, watching the floor numbers descend. When I was 25, my father had a heart attack. Nearly died. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital watching him struggle to breathe, wondering if he'd make it. And during those 3 weeks, all I could think about was what he'd say about my life if he died. What would people say at his funeral? What legacy would he leave? The elevator reached the ground floor, but neither of them moved to exit. My father is a good man. He built his business honestly, treated his employees well, gave back to the community. People respect him because he earned it. And I realized I hadn't earned anything. Everything I had was because of him, because of privilege, because of luck. I was cruel to people like you because I could be, because there were no consequences for me. And I knew if my father died, people would remember him fondly and forget I existed because I hadn't done anything worth remembering. So this is about your legacy? Samantha finally asked. No, it's about being someone I can be proud of, someone my father can be proud of. Someone that scared kid in high school, the one I bullied, could be proud of. I can't undo what I did, Samantha. But I can try to be better going forward. And helping you isn't charity. It's me recognizing talent and drive and determination that I admire, that I want to be part of. The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability, cracked something else open in Samantha. This wasn't the Eddie Monroe she'd known. This was someone who'd looked at himself and hadn't liked what he saw, and had actually done the hard work of changing. Okay, she said softly. I believe you. You do? He asked, surprised. I'm choosing to. That doesn't mean I trust you completely yet. Trust has to be earned, remember? You said that yourself. But I believe you're trying to be better. That's enough for now. Over the next 6 weeks, Samantha's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined. She still ran the food cart during the day, but her evenings and weekends were consumed with restaurant planning. She met with suppliers, tested recipes in Edward's personal kitchen, designed menus, interviewed potential staff. Edward had hired her a lawyer, as promised, and they'd drawn up partnership agreements that protected both of them. Everything was documented, transparent, exactly as she'd demanded. The restaurant was taking shape. The warehouse conversion was ahead of schedule, and Samantha visited the site almost daily, watching as her vision became reality. The kitchen was being installed, the dining room taking form, and with each visit, the dream felt more tangible, more real. But not everything was smooth. Samantha quickly learned that the restaurant world was cutthroat and unforgiving. When word got out about the new establishment, other restaurateurs started circling, looking for weaknesses. Food critics began sniffing around, asking questions about the chef no one had heard of. And then there were Edward's business associates, some of whom made it very clear they thought he was making a mistake partnering with someone so inexperienced. At an investors' dinner that Edward insisted she attend, Samantha overheard a conversation that confirmed her worst fears. Edward Monroe's lost his mind with this project, a man in an expensive suit muttered to his companion. Partnering with a food cart operator? It's going to be a disaster. I heard she's some kind of charity case from his past, the other man replied, probably trying to assuage his white guilt or something. Whatever the reason, we're going to lose money on this. Mark my words. Samantha felt her face burn with humiliation. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself. But what could she say? They weren't wrong about her inexperience. She was a food cart operator. She didn't have formal training or credentials. Maybe she was a disaster waiting to happen. Edward found her hiding in the restroom 20 minutes later, mascara smudged from angry tears she'd tried to hold back. What happened? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I heard them. Your investors. They think I'm a joke, Edward. They think you're going to fail because of me. Samantha. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am in over my head. Maybe I should just stick to what I know. Keep the food cart. Stop pretending I can be something more. Edward knelt down so he was at eye level with her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Listen to me. Those men? They wouldn't recognize real talent if it hit them in the face. They invest in safe bets, established names, things that have already proven successful. They don't take risks, which means they never discover anything truly special. But I do. And I discovered you. You didn't discover me. You knew me. You felt guilty about me, Samantha cried. That's how it started, yes, but it's not why I'm doing this now. I'm doing this because I've tasted your food, Samantha. I've watched you work, seen how you connect with people, how you turn simple ingredients into something memorable. That's not something you can learn in culinary school. That's talent. That's passion. And no amount of fancy credentials can replace that. Samantha wanted to believe him. She wanted to push past the doubt and fear. But the voices of those investors echoed in her head, mixing with older voices from high school, all telling her the same thing. You don't belong here. What if I fail? She whispered. Then you fail, and you learn from it, and you try again. That's what real success looks like, Samantha. Not never failing, but refusing to stay down when you do. They returned to the dinner, and Samantha forced herself to hold her head high, to engage in conversations with people who clearly saw her as beneath them. It was exhausting and demoralizing, but she did it. She survived. 2 weeks before the restaurant's scheduled opening, disaster struck. The head chef Samantha had hired, an experienced professional who was supposed to help her manage the kitchen, quit without notice. He'd been offered a position at a more established restaurant, one where he didn't have to work under an amateur, as he put it in his resignation email. Samantha sat in the unfinished dining room, surrounded by construction chaos, and felt everything crumbling around her. Without a head chef, she'd have to run the kitchen herself, which meant being responsible for every single dish that went out. The pressure was enormous. the responsibility terrifying. "What am I going to do?" she asked Edward, who'd come as soon as she called. "You're going to run the kitchen yourself." "Edward, I can't. I've never run a professional kitchen. I've never managed a full staff. I don't have the experience." "Stop." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Stop telling yourself what you can't do and start focusing on what you can. You've been cooking for 7 years. You know your recipes inside and out. You know how to manage time, how to handle pressure, how to deliver quality consistently. The only difference between a food cart and a restaurant kitchen is scale, and you're smart enough to figure that out." "But what if," Samantha cuts in, "what if you're amazing? What if this is actually the best thing that could have happened, because now you don't have to compromise your vision to accommodate someone else's ego? What if you trust yourself for once?" Samantha looked around the dining room, at the space she'd helped design, at the kitchen visible through the open doorway, at the dream she'd thought was dead years ago now coming to life. And she made a decision. Not a safe decision or a smart decision, but a brave one. "Okay, I'll do it. I'll run the kitchen myself." The next 2 weeks were a blur of 18-hour days. Samantha trained her kitchen staff, perfected her recipes, created systems and processes. She practiced plating, tested timing, ran mock services to work out the kinks. Lily stayed with a neighbor most evenings, and Samantha felt the familiar guilt of not being there, of choosing work over her daughter. But this time, it felt different. This time, she was building something that would change both their lives, not just surviving day to day. The night before opening, Samantha stood alone in the completed restaurant, taking it all in. The dining room was beautiful, warm and inviting with soft lighting and carefully chosen decor. The kitchen gleamed with professional equipment. The menu, handwritten in her own style, showcased dishes she'd dreamed about making for years. Edward found her there, standing in the middle of it all, tears streaming down her face. "Second thoughts?" he asked gently. "No. Just, I can't believe this is real. I keep waiting to wake up and find myself fail, that this was all just a dream." "It's real, Samantha. You made it real." He handed her a small wrapped box. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow, an opening gift." Inside was a chef's knife, custom made, with her name engraved on the handle. It was the most beautiful tool she'd ever seen, and she couldn't stop the fresh tears that came. "Edward, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough, but it's a start," he smiled. "Besides, you're going to need a good knife. Tomorrow, you're going to show this city what real talent looks like." Opening night arrived with a terror Samantha had never experienced. The restaurant, which she'd finally named Lily's Table after her daughter, was fully booked. Food critics had made reservations. Local media was covering the opening. And somewhere in that dining room would be those investors who'd called her a joke, waiting to see her fail. Samantha arrived at 4 in the afternoon, giving herself 3 hours before service started at 7. Her kitchen staff of 6 was already there, prepping vegetables, preparing sauces, and setting up stations. They looked to her for direction, for confidence, for leadership. She couldn't afford to let them see her fear. "All right, everyone, listen up," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Tonight is going to be chaotic. There will be tickets coming in faster than we've practiced. There will be problems we haven't anticipated. And there will be moments when you want to quit and run out the back door. Don't. We're a team, and we're going to get through this together." She went over the menu one more time, made sure everyone knew their responsibilities, then sent them to their stations. The kitchen hummed with focused energy, the kind that came before battle. Samantha put on her chef's whites, tied back her hair, and gripped the knife Edward had given her. It felt solid in her hand, grounding. At 6:30, Lily arrived with the neighbor who'd been watching her. She was wearing her new dress, her hair in careful braids, looking so proud of her mother that Samantha's heart ached. "The restaurant is so pretty, Mom," Lily said, her eyes wide as she took in the dining room. "You did this. You actually did this." "We did this, baby. All of this is for you," Samantha said with a casual smile. Edward appeared, dressed in a suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. But his eyes were soft when he looked at Samantha. "You ready?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's all courage is, doing the thing that terrifies you." The first customers arrived at 7 sharp. Samantha watched from the kitchen window as the dining room filled with well-dressed people, their voices creating a pleasant buzz of anticipation. She recognized some of Edward's business associates, saw the food critics with their notepads, spotted local influencers already taking photos. The first ticket printed, and Samantha's heart jumped into her throat. It had begun. For the first hour, everything ran smoothly. Orders came in at a manageable pace. Dishes went out perfectly plated. Timing was good. Samantha started to relax, to think maybe this wouldn't be a disaster after all. Then the rush hit. Tickets started printing faster than they could keep up with. 20 orders, 30, 40. The kitchen became a storm of activity, controlling chaos as her staff worked to keep pace. Samantha moved between stations, coordinating, adjusting, fixing mistakes before they went out. Sweat dripped down her face despite the industrial fans. Her hands moved on autopilot, plating dish after dish with the precision she'd practiced for weeks. "Fire table 7. Refire the risotto for 12, it's too salty. Where's the duck for 16? 2 minutes out." The cacophony of kitchen noise, the heat, the pressure, it was everything she'd feared and somehow more than she'd imagined. But underneath the terror was something else. Exhilaration. This was what she'd been born to do. At 8:30, disaster struck. The oven malfunctioned, temperature spiking dangerously high, ruining an entire order of braised short ribs that had taken hours to prepare. Samantha had backups, thank God, but they needed at least 20 more minutes. The table that had ordered them was one of the food critics. "What do I do?" her sous chef asked, panic in his eyes. Samantha thought fast. "Rework the menu. Offer them the seared salmon instead, complimentary. I'll go talk to them myself, explain the situation." She stripped off her apron, wiped the sweat from her face, and walked into the dining room for the first time that night. The critics' table was in the center. 3 people in expensive clothes, looking impatient. Samantha's heart pounded, but she forced herself to approach with confidence she didn't feel. "Good evening. I'm Samantha Wells, the chef. I need to inform you that there's been an equipment malfunction in the kitchen, and your short ribs will be delayed. However, I'd like to offer you our seared salmon instead, in the house, with my sincerest apologies." The lead critic, a severe-looking woman named Margaret Chen, studied Samantha with sharp eyes. "Equipment failures on opening night, that's not a good sign." "No, it's not," Samantha agreed, refusing to make excuses. "But how we handle unexpected problems defines us more than anything going right. I promise you, whatever you order, I will make it perfect. You have my word." Margaret considered this, then nodded. "I'll take the salmon, but I'm holding you to that promise." Back in the kitchen, Samantha put everything she had into that salmon. She pan-seared it to exactly medium rare, created a lemon caper butter sauce that was bright and balanced, plated it with roasted vegetables she'd prepared herself that morning. It was, without exaggeration, the best dish she'd ever made. She watched through the kitchen window as Margaret took her first bite. The critic's expression remained neutral, gave nothing away. Then she took another bite, and another. By the time the plate came back to the kitchen, it was completely clean. Service continued until nearly midnight. By the end, Samantha's feet were screaming, her back ached, and she'd never been more exhausted in her life. But they'd done it. They'd served over 150 meals, handled multiple crises, and somehow, miraculously, made it through. Edward found her in the kitchen after the last customer left, sitting on the floor with her back against the walk-in refrigerator, too tired to move. "You survived," he said, sliding down to sit beside her. "Barely. The critics loved it. I've been monitoring social media. Early reviews are incredible, Samantha. People are raving about the food." She wanted to feel excited, but she was too exhausted. "One night down, every night from now on to go." You don't sound happy, Edward said. I'm terrified. What if tonight was a fluke? What if tomorrow everything falls apart? What if… Samantha replied. Edward took her hand, stopping the spiral of anxiety. What if you just let yourself enjoy this moment? You did something amazing tonight. You proved every single person who doubted you wrong, including yourself. Samantha leaned her head against his shoulder, too tired to question the intimacy of the gesture. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for giving me a chance to be part of something real. They sat there in the quiet kitchen, the calm after the storm, and Samantha let herself feel it. Pride, accomplishment, hope. For the first time in 7 years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. But neither of them knew that outside the restaurant, in a car parked across the street, someone was watching. Someone who had very different plans for Lily's table and for Samantha Wells. Someone from her past who wasn't ready to let her succeed. The figure in the car made a phone call, their voice cold and calculated. It's time. Initiate phase 2. If you want to know who's watching and what they're planning, make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story is going to change everything. The morning after opening night, Samantha woke up to her phone ringing incessantly. Still half asleep, she answered without checking the caller ID. Ms. Wells, this is Patricia Lawson from the Tribune. I'd love to interview you about the restaurant opening. Our readers are very interested in your story. That was the first of 17 calls that morning. Food bloggers, local news stations, magazine editors, everyone wanted to talk to her. The reviews from last night had been even better than Edward had indicated. Margaret Chen's review in particular was glowing, calling. Lily's table. A revelation, and Samantha, a raw talent that reminds us why we fell in love with food in the first place. Samantha sat at her tiny kitchen table, reading the reviews on her laptop while Lily ate cereal, and couldn't quite process that they were talking about her restaurant, about her food. Mom, you're famous, Lily said, reading over her shoulder. Not famous, sweetie, just noticed. But noticed was enough to change everything. By noon, the reservation line was completely booked for the next 3 weeks. By evening, people were calling, asking to be put on a waiting list. The restaurant that had seemed like such a risk was becoming, almost overnight, the hottest reservation in the city. Samantha should have been thrilled. Instead, she felt a growing sense of unease she couldn't explain. Success had come too fast, too easy. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on the 5th day of operation. She arrived at the restaurant at her usual 4 o'clock to find Edward already there, his face grave. In his hand was a letter, official looking, with a law firm's letterhead. What's wrong? Samantha asked, her stomach already sinking. We're being sued. Edward handed her the letter. For health code violations and unsafe working conditions, the claim is that the restaurant should be shut down immediately pending investigation. Samantha scanned the letter, her hands shaking. The accusations were detailed, specific, and completely false. They claimed rat droppings in the storage area, expired ingredients, broken equipment, creating dangerous situations. None of it was true. Her kitchen was spotless, her ingredients fresh, everything up to code. They'd passed health inspection before opening. This is insane. Who would do this? Samantha said, her hands trembling. That's the thing. Edward's jaw was tight. The lawsuit is being filed on behalf of anonymous employees claiming unsafe conditions, but Samantha, I've talked to your staff. None of them filed this complaint. Someone is lying, and they're using the legal system to try to shut you down. The implications hit her like a physical blow. Someone wanted her to fail. Wanted it badly enough to create false accusations, to risk legal consequences themselves. But who? The restaurant world can be vicious, Edward continued. Competitors don't like new success stories. You've taken business from established restaurants, made them look stale by comparison. This could be someone trying to eliminate the competition. But Samantha's instincts told her it was more personal than that. The timing was too perfect, the accusations too calculated. This wasn't just business. This was revenge. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello, Samantha." The voice was male, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. Long time no talk. Her blood turned to ice. "David." Edward's head snapped up at the name, his expression darkening. "I see you've been doing well for yourself," David continued, his tone mocking. "Nice restaurant. Real fancy. Must have cost a lot of money to set up. Money you definitely didn't have when you were raising my daughter on food stamps." "What do you want?" Samantha snapped. "What do I want? I want what's mine, Samantha. I'm Lily's father. That means I'm entitled to part of your success. After all, if I hadn't given you a daughter, you wouldn't have this cute little backstory everyone's eating up. Single mother makes good. It's very touching." Samantha's hands clenched into fists. David had walked out 7 years ago. He had never paid a cent of child support and never even called to check on Lily. And now that there was success to claim, he was crawling back. "You have no rights to Lily or to anything I've built," Samantha yelled. "Actually, I have lots of rights. I'm her biological father. Never gave up custody, just stepped away for a while. And if you don't want me to exercise those rights, if you don't want me to drag you through family court and make things very difficult, you're going to pay me what I deserve." "You deserve nothing," Samantha said. "Then I guess we'll see what a judge thinks." "Oh, and Samantha, those health code violations, that's just the beginning. You think you can have success without me getting my piece?" "Think again," David said on the phone. The line went dead. Samantha stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear, her entire world tilting on its axis. David was behind the lawsuit. David was trying to destroy her restaurant, to force her into giving him money by threatening everything she'd built. "That was him, wasn't it?" Edward's voice was dangerously quiet. "Lily's father?" Samantha nodded, unable to speak. "Tell me everything. Right now. Everything about him, about when he left, about your relationship. I need to know what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, Samantha told Edward everything. How she'd met David when she was 22, working 2 jobs and taking night classes. How he'd seemed charming, promising, different from the guys she'd known. How he'd convinced her they could build a life together. How she'd gotten pregnant, and he'd sworn he'd stay. How he'd lasted exactly 6 months after Lily was born, before deciding fatherhood was too hard, too limiting, not what he'd signed up for. "He emptied our joint bank account when he left," Samantha said, her voice hollow. "Took everything. I had to move back in with my mum, start over from nothing. I tried to get child support, but he'd moved out of state, changed jobs constantly, made himself impossible to track. Eventually I just gave up and focused on surviving. And now he's back, because you're successful." Edward's expression was thunderous. "This is extortion, Samantha. We can fight this." "How? He's Lily's father. He has legal rights, even if he's never used them. If he pushes for custody just to spite me," Samantha cried. "He won't get it. No judge would give custody to someone who abandoned his child for 7 years, Edward assured her. "But the fight alone could destroy me. Legal fees, time in court, the publicity, the restaurant is just starting. I can't afford a scandal," Samantha said. Edward stood up, pacing the office like a caged animal. "There has to be a way. We'll get lawyers, investigators. We'll prove he's behind the false health code violations." "That could take months. In the meantime, the lawsuit alone is going to damage the restaurant's reputation. People don't care if accusations are true. They just care that they exist," Samantha said. "So what, you're just going to give up? Let him win?" Edward responded. "I don't know," Samantha's voice broke. "I don't know what to do. All my life I've had to fight for everything. And just when I finally thought I was winning, just when I thought I could have something good, it's being taken away. Maybe I was stupid to think someone like me could have this kind of success. Maybe the universe is telling me to go back to my food cart where I belong," Samantha cried. Don't you dare, Edward said fiercely, grabbing her shoulders. Don't you dare let him make you doubt yourself. You earned this, Samantha. Every single bit of it. And we are not going to let him take it away. Then what do we do? Before Edward could answer, his phone rang. He looked at the caller ID, and his expression changed, something calculating sliding across his features. I need to take this. Don't move. I have an idea, but I need to make some calls first. He left the office, and Samantha sat alone, drowning in fear and uncertainty. Through the window, she could see the dining room being set up for evening service. Her staff moved efficiently, preparing for another night of success. They believed in her, in the restaurant, in the future they were building together. She couldn't let them down. She couldn't let David win. She couldn't let fear make her decisions. But she also couldn't see a way out. Edward returned 20 minutes later, his expression unreadable. He sat down across from Samantha and clasped his hands on the desk. I've made some calls, called in some favors, and I think I've found a way to handle David, but you're not going to like it. I'm listening, Samantha said, sitting straight. David's lawsuit is based on false premises. The health code violations don't exist, which means when inspectors investigate, they'll find nothing. That exonerates us legally, but the damage to reputation still happens. So we need to get ahead of it. How? We go public. We tell your story, the real story, before he can control the narrative. Single mother abandoned by her child's father, builds success from nothing, gets targeted by that same father trying to extort money. Make him the villain publicly before he can make you one legally. Samantha felt her stomach turn. You want me to air my private life for everyone to see, to make Lily's abandonment public knowledge? I want to protect what you've built. And sometimes protection means offense instead of defense. Edward leaned forward. I've already talked to a friend at Channel 7. They'll do a sympathetic piece, interview you, let you tell your story your way. Once it airs, public opinion will be on your side. David will look exactly like what he is, a deadbeat dad trying to cash in on his ex's success. And what about Lily? What about when kids at school see that interview and know her father abandoned her? When she has to answer questions about why her dad doesn't love her, Samantha asked, tears running down her cheeks. Lily already knows her father isn't in her life, but you're right, it will be hard on her. So we make sure she's prepared, make sure she understands why we're doing this. And we make sure she knows that none of it is her fault, Edward said. Samantha stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the city that had always promised everything and given so little. She thought about the food cart, about 7 years of invisibility, of safety. Going public meant being seen in a way she'd never been seen before. It meant vulnerability, exposure, risk. But staying silent meant letting David control her life again, the way he had when he'd left, when he'd taken everything and forced her to start over. And she'd promised herself 7 years ago in that empty apartment with a crying baby that she would never let anyone have that kind of power over her again. Okay, she said finally. Set up the interview. The interview was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Samantha had to keep the restaurant running and had to pretend everything was fine while her world teetered on the edge of collapse. The health inspectors came, found nothing wrong as expected, but the lawsuit remained active. David had made sure of that. The night before the interview, Samantha sat down with Lily and explained what was happening. She kept it simple, age-appropriate, but honest. Her daughter listened with the solemn attention of someone much older than 7, and when Samantha finished, Lily climbed into her lap. Is Dad a bad person? She asked quietly. I think he's a person who makes bad choices, Samantha said carefully. He's hurting us because he wants money, and that's wrong. But that doesn't mean you're not lovable, or that any of this is your fault. Sometimes adults do selfish things and kids get caught in the middle. Are you scared? Yes, very scared, Lily replied. But you're doing it anyway. Yes, Lily hugged her tight. You're brave, Mom. Braver than anyone I know. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. Samantha watched it at home with Lily and Edward, her heart in her throat. The reporter had done exactly what Edward promised, told her story with sympathy and respect. They showed footage of the food cart, of the restaurant, of Samantha cooking. They interviewed regular customers who talked about her kindness, her work ethic, her talent. And then they got to David. The reporter pulled no punches, detailing his abandonment, his refusal to pay child support, and his current extortion attempt. They showed the lawsuit, explained its baseless nature, and made it clear this was an attack on a successful woman by a man who'd contributed nothing to that success. When it ended, Samantha's phone immediately started ringing, but this time the calls were different. Supporters, customers, even other single mothers thanking her for telling her story. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting the restaurant, condemning David's actions, celebrating Samantha's courage. The narrative had shifted. Publicly, completely, irrevocably. 2 days later, David's lawyer contacted Edward to say they were dropping the lawsuit. The public backlash had been too severe, and David himself had apparently fled the state to escape the negative attention. He sent one message through his lawyer. "Tell Samantha she won. This time." Samantha read the message and felt nothing but tired relief. He was gone, for now at least. The threat had passed. The restaurant not only survived the scandal but thrived because of it. Reservations extended months in advance. They were written up in national food magazines. Samantha hired 2 more line cooks and expanded the menu. 6 months after opening, Lily's Table was recognized as one of the top new restaurants in the country. On the anniversary of their opening night, Edward arranged a surprise. He took Samantha back to the corner where her food cart used to sit, and there, installed on the building beside it, was a historical plaque. On this corner, Samantha Wells served meals from her food cart for 7 years while raising her daughter alone. Her determination and talent eventually led to the founding of Lily's Table, proving that success isn't about where you start, but about refusing to give up on your dreams. Samantha stared at it, tears streaming down her face. "You did this." "The city did it. I just suggested it." "Your story matters, Samantha. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever felt stuck, who's ever thought they couldn't have more. You proved them wrong. You proved yourself wrong." She turned to him. This man who'd been her tormentor, and was now her partner, her friend. Maybe something more, though neither had acknowledged it yet. "Thank you for everything. For the second chance. For believing in me. For fighting for me." Samantha hugged him tightly. "Thank you for letting me be part of your journey. For showing me what real strength looks like," Edward said with a smile. They stood together in the place where it had all begun, watching the city move around them, full of possibility and promise. Samantha thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, exhausted and hopeless, convinced her dreams were dead. That woman wouldn't recognize the person she'd become, confident, successful, unafraid. But she was still the same person underneath. Still the girl from the rundown apartment on 7th Street. Still the single mother who'd done whatever it took to provide for her daughter. Still Samantha Wells, who'd learned that success wasn't about becoming someone different, but about having the courage to be fully, unapologetically yourself. "What are you thinking?" Edward asked. "I'm thinking about Mrs. Chen, my customer from the cart. She told me once that I didn't believe I deserved good things. She was right. But I'm learning. Every day I'm learning that maybe I do deserve this. That maybe we all deserve to have our dreams come true if we're willing to work for them." "You've earned every bit of it," Edward said. Samantha smiled, linking her arm through his. "We've earned it. Both of us. Now come on. We have a restaurant to run." They walked away from the plaque, from the past, toward the future they'd built together. Behind them, the city gleamed in the evening light, full of challenges and opportunities, of struggles and triumphs. And somewhere in that city, a little girl named Lily was growing up knowing that her mother had fought for her dreams and won. that success was possible even when the odds seemed impossible, that giving up was never the answer. The story didn't end with happily ever after. It ended with the promise of more episodes to come, more battles to fight, more victories to celebrate. It ended with hope, with possibility, with the understanding that life was messy and complicated and beautiful, and that sometimes the people who hurt us most can become the ones who help us most. But most importantly, it ended with Samantha Wells standing tall, no longer invisible, no longer silent, finally believing in herself the way others had always believed in her. Before you go, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories of triumph over adversity. Drop a comment telling us what inspired you most about Samantha's journey, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their dreams are worth fighting for. Because everyone deserves a second chance. Everyone deserves to succeed. And everyone deserves to believe that they're worthy of their dreams coming true.